They thought I was just a walking ATM and an unpaid maid for my sister's lavish engagement, but they were dead wrong. When I discovered my grandmother's legacy had been drained to the very last penny to fund their vanity, I did not just leave. I prepared a devastating sentence. When the judge's gavel finally slammed down, they did not just lose $85,000, they lost the very roof over their heads. My name is Mallory. At 27 years old, I was the youngest sous chef in the history of the Obsidian Palette, a 5-star culinary fortress in the city where perfection was the baseline. Yet, as my tires crunched against the gravel driveway of the Victorian mansion in suburban Connecticut, my professional confidence evaporated. The house loomed against the gray December sky, a beautiful cage that had suffocated me for most of my adolescence. I cut the engine and took a deep breath, trying to steel myself for what was supposed to be a celebration. I was here to prepare the engagement party for my younger sister, but the dread sitting heavy in my stomach felt more like I was reporting for a prison sentence. I barely made it through the oak double doors before the coldness hit me. It was not the temperature. The house was stiflingly warm, smelling of potpourri and old money. The chill came from my mother, Patricia. She did not hug me. She did not ask how the drive was or if I was tired from working a 60-hour week. She stood in the foyer, arms crossed, her eyes scanning me for flaws. "You are late," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. The guests start arriving at 7. Do you have any idea how much needs to be done before I could apologize or explain that traffic on I-95 was a nightmare? She tossed a bundle of fabric at my face. I caught it reflexively. It was an apron, not just any apron, but an old, stained one from the back of the pantry, not the professional chef's whites I had brought with me. "Get to work," she commanded. Turning her back on me, I walked into the living room, the fabric clutched in my fist. My sister, Tiffany, was standing on a podium in the center of the room, admiring herself in a full-length mirror. At 24, she was the golden child, literally and figuratively. She was glowing, draped in a white engagement dress that likely cost more than my car. She saw me in the reflection, but did not turn around. "Mallory, grab me a water," Tiffany said, adjusting the silk on her hip. "Room temperature, and hurry up. I'm parched." There was no hello. No thank you. I was transparent to her, visible only when she needed something fetched. I moved toward the kitchen, passing the study where my stepfather, Garrison, sat in his leather armchair. He swirled a glass of amber liquid that I knew was a 30-year-old scotch. He looked up, his eyes glassy and dismissive. "We have 50 people coming tonight." "Mallory," he said, taking a slow sip. "I expect the menu to be substantial. And don't ask for help. We decided not to hire a catering staff to save costs for the family." "You can handle it." "That is what you do, isn't it?" I nodded, biting my tongue. Save costs. He was drinking a $500 bottle of whiskey while demanding I cook a banquet for 50 people alone. The next 6 hours were a blur of heat and frantic motion. I was in the kitchen from 2 in the afternoon until 8 in the evening, chopping, searing, and plating. The exhaust fan hummed a monotonous drone that barely drowned out the sounds coming from the back patio. Through the window, I could see them, my mother, Garrison, and Tiffany were lounging on the wicker furniture, laughing as they clinked glasses. They were discussing their upcoming winter vacation to Aspen, debating which luxury lodge had the best spa services. My back ached, and sweat trickled down my spine, but I kept working. When the first round of appetizers was ready, I walked out to the patio, carrying a heavy silver tray of foie gras bruschetta. I had purchased the foie gras myself, spending over $200 of my own tips because Garrison had claimed the grocery budget was tight. I set the tray down on the low table. The aroma was rich and decadent. They descended on the food immediately. "Finally," Tiffany mumbled through a mouthful, crumbs falling onto her lap. No one moved over on the sofa. No one pulled up a chair. No one offered me a glass of water. I stood there for a moment, hovering like a ghost, before realizing I was not welcome to eat the food I had just prepared. I turned to head back inside to check the roast when I heard my mother's voice drop to a conspiratorial whisper. I paused in the shadow of the doorframe. Honestly, it is a good thing she is back there, my mother said. I hate the smell of that kitchen grease on her. It is so low class. I know. Right, Tiffany giggled. But hey, at least she is useful for once. Imagine if we had to pay a real chef. Mallory is just background noise. Tonight is about me. I felt a physical blow to my chest, harder than any physical strike. I leaned against the cool wall of the hallway, my eyes burning. I looked down at my hands, scarred from burns and cuts, the hands of a professional who ran one of the best kitchens in New York. To them, those hands were just tools. I was not a daughter. I was not a sister. I was an unpaid servant, tolerated only as long as I was serving them. By 8 o'clock, the mansion was packed with 50 guests. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the murmur of polite conversation. Upstairs, hanging in the back of the guest closet, was the emerald silk gown I had bought specifically for this evening. It remained there, untouched. My mother had intercepted me before I could change, telling me that wearing a formal dress would confuse the guests. She claimed they would not know who to ask for refills if I looked like one of them. So, instead of celebrating my sister, I was wearing a stiff black button-down shirt and black slacks, indistinguishable from hired help, weaving through the crowd with a tray of champagne flutes. I was making my rounds near the fireplace when Tiffany beckoned me over. She was holding a large glass of Pinot Noir, surrounded by her bridesmaids. As I stepped forward to take an empty napkin from her hand, she looked me dead in the eyes, smirked, and deliberately tilted her wrist. The dark red liquid cascaded down the front of her white dress and splashed violently onto the cream-colored Persian rug. "Oh my God!" Tiffany shrieked, her voice piercing through the ambient jazz music. "Mallory, look what you did! You are so clumsy!" The entire room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. I stood frozen, the empty tray trembling in my hands. Before I could defend myself, my mother marched through the crowd. She did not ask what happened. She did not look at the stain on Tiffany's dress. She glared at me with pure venom. "You have ruined the carpet," Patricia hissed. "Get down there and clean it up, now. Show some respect for your sister's engagement and fix your mess." But I didn't spill it. I started to say, but she cut me off. "On your knees, Mallory," she commanded, pointing at the floor. "Do it before it sets. Don't embarrass us in front of the Caldwells." I looked at Tiffany's fiancé, Braden, and his wealthy parents standing nearby. They looked uncomfortable but said nothing. My face burned with humiliation, but the conditioning of 20 years was too strong to break in an instant. Slowly, I lowered myself to my knees on the wet rug. I took a cloth napkin and began to dab at the wine. While I was on the floor, my stepfather, Garrison, decided this was the perfect moment to make a toast. He tapped a silver spoon against his glass, drawing the room's attention away from my degradation and toward his ego. "To Tiffany!" Garrison boomed, raising his scotch. "Our shining star, the only pride of this family." He paused for dramatic effect, then gestured vaguely downward at me. "And let us be charitable to Mallory, our unlucky daughter, who seems to have found her true calling working in the kitchen. At least one of them knows how to serve." "Right." A ripple of laughter went through the room. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. I scrubbed harder, trying to make the stain disappear, trying to make myself disappear. Above me, I heard the shutter sound of a phone camera. I looked up to see Tiffany holding her phone out, live streaming the scene to her thousands of followers. "Say hi, everyone," Tiffany said, giggling as she zoomed in on my hands. "This is what happens when you don't have grace. Modern Cinderella. Too bad there is no prince coming for this one." Her friends leaned in, laughing, their faces illuminated by the screen light. I looked past the phone, searching for my mother. I needed her to stop this. I needed her to be a mother. But when our eyes locked, I saw no pity. She was smiling. She was sipping her wine, nodding at a neighbor. completely content with the spectacle. She enjoyed seeing me on my knees. It confirmed her worldview that Tiffany was the queen and I was the subject. That was when the final thread snapped. Tiffany's Pomeranian, a small, nervous creature named Princess, trotted into the circle and promptly vomited on the hardwood floor just inches from the rug. "You," Tiffany squealed, wrinkling her nose. She looked down at me, her expression one of utter entitlement. "Mallory, since you are already down there, get that too. Use a fresh napkin." The room waited. The air felt static. I stopped scrubbing. The wine stain was still there, a jagged red wound on the cream wool. I slowly stood up. My knees popped audibly in the silence. I did not look at the vomit. I did not look at Tiffany. I looked at the heavy, soil-stained apron tied around my waist. Without saying a single word, I reached behind my back and undid the knot. The apron fell into my hand. I walked over to the ornate trash can next to the fireplace, the one meant for cocktail napkins, and dropped the apron inside. It hit the bottom with a soft thud. I turned around and walked toward the front door. I walked straight out the front door, the heavy oak slamming shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my bones. I could hear them screaming my name through the thick wood. My mother's voice was screeching something about duty and ungratefulness, while Tiffany was yelling about who was going to clean up the mess. I did not turn around. I did not hesitate. I simply walked into the biting December wind, the cold air hitting my flushed face like a slap of reality. I got into my car and turned the key. The engine roared to life, drowning out the muffled noise coming from the mansion. I drove. The roads were slick with a mixture of rain and sleet, the kind of weather that usually made me nervous. But tonight I felt nothing. My hands were steady on the wheel. My mind, usually clouded by guilt and the desperate need to please them, was suddenly terrifyingly clear. I was done. I pulled into the driveway of a small, warm cottage 20 minutes later. It belonged to Aunt Karen, my late father's best friend and the only person who had ever looked at me with genuine affection. When she opened the door and saw me standing there in my soaking, wet server's uniform, shivering not from cold but from adrenaline, her face crumpled. "Mallory," she gasped, pulling me inside. "Honey, you look like a ghost. What did they do to you?" I could not speak yet. I just sat at her kitchen table while she made tea. As the warmth returned to my fingers, a new thought crystallized in my mind. If I was really leaving, if I was cutting them off, I needed resources. I needed to move out of my shared apartment and get my own place. I remembered the education trust fund my grandmother had left me. I was supposed to receive full access when I turned 25, which was 2 years ago. But my mother had convinced me to leave it in the account. She had said the interest rates were climbing and it would be foolish to touch it. I had trusted her. "Karen, can I use your laptop?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. I logged into the bank portal. I still had the password memorized from the old files I used to manage for the family. The screen loaded slowly, the spinning wheel mocking my anxiety. Then, the dashboard appeared. I stared at the screen. I blinked. Sure, I was misreading it. Balance $0.00. I felt the blood drain from my face. I clicked on the transaction history tab. It was a bloodbath. Over the last 6 months, the account had been systematically drained. Withdrawal, $10,000. Deposit to the Grand Ballroom. Withdrawal, $12,000. Vera Wang Bridal. Withdrawal, $5,000. Garrison Amex payment. Line after line. My grandmother's legacy, the money she told me was for my future, for my freedom, was gone. It had all been funneled into Tiffany's wedding and Garrison's debts. The total sum withdrawn was $85,000. I clicked on the image of the most recent withdrawal slip. There, at the bottom, was a signature, Mallory Vance, but I had not signed it. The loops were too wide. The slant was wrong. It was a forgery, a clumsy, arrogant forgery made by someone who thought I would never check, or that I would be too weak to do anything about it if I did. The sadness that had weighed on me all evening evaporated. In its place, a cold, Hard rage began to solidify in my chest. This was not just bad parenting. This was not just favoritism. This was theft. This was a felony. I pulled out my phone. My hands were not shaking anymore. I typed a message to my mother. I know about Grandma's money. I see the withdrawals. The reply came 3 bubbles later, instantaneous, as if she had been waiting for me to beg for forgiveness. Don't be selfish. That is family money. Your sister needs a perfect wedding, and we did what was necessary. Come back and clean up the rug, and we can discuss an allowance for you later. I stared at the words. Don't be selfish. I put the phone down on the table. I looked at Aunt Karen, who was reading the screen over my shoulder, her hand covering her mouth in horror. I am not going back. Karen, I said, my voice quiet and steady. And I am not just leaving. I am going to sue them. By 9 a.m, Aunt Karen had me sitting in a leather chair in a high-rise office in Midtown Manhattan. Across the desk sat Elias Thorne. He was a legend in New York family law, known not for his compassion, but for his ability to dismantle opponents with surgical precision. He did not offer me tea or sympathy. He simply held out his hand for the folder of bank statements I had printed. He scanned the pages in silence for 10 minutes. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. This is not a misunderstanding, Ms. Vance, Elias said, tapping the paper with a manicured finger. This is grand larceny, and given the timeline, it is also wire fraud. They forged your signature to bypass bank security protocols. I swallowed hard, the reality of their betrayal hitting me again. There is more, I said, reaching into my bag. I found credit report alerts on my old email this morning. My mother has my birth certificate and social security card locked in her safe. There are 3 credit cards opened in my name that I never applied for. They are maxed out with balances totaling nearly $15,000. Elias took the new documents. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. Identity theft. Excellent. That moves this from a simple civil dispute into criminal territory. It gives us leverage they cannot ignore. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. Here is the strategy. We do not call them. We do not threaten them. Silence is golden. If they know we are coming, they will hide the remaining assets or destroy evidence. We file ex parte to freeze everything immediately. We hit them before they even know they are in a fight. I followed his instructions to the letter. By that afternoon, I had rented a tiny, nondescript studio apartment in Queens with money Aunt Karen lent me. I changed my phone number and blocked every family member on all social media platforms. I went dark. However, since they could not reach me to demand I come back and clean, they decided to destroy me. 2 days later, I was called into the Human Resources office at the Obsidian Palette. The HR director looked uncomfortable. She slid a printed email across the desk. It was from my mother, sent to the General Restaurant Inquiry inbox, copying the owners. It claimed I was a drug addict who had run away from home after stealing my sister's diamond engagement earrings. Mallory. These are serious accusations, the director said, eyeing me suspiciously. I felt the familiar panic rising, but then I remembered Elias's words. Silence is golden, but evidence is king. I pulled out a folder Elias had prepared for this exact scenario. This is a letter from my attorney regarding an active investigation into financial fraud and defamation committed against me by the author of that email. I said, keeping my voice level. And here is a time-stamped photo of me at work during the time she claims I was stealing jewelry in Connecticut. Before the HR director could respond, the door swung open. Chef Gordon, a man who usually only shouted about undercooked scallops, walked in. He looked furious, but not at me. Is this about that trash email? Gordon barked. Mallory has been here every day, running my line flawlessly. If her family's crazy, that is their problem. I am not losing my best sous chef because of some suburban drama. Fix this, or I walk. He slammed the door as he left. I had never felt more protected in my life. With my job secure, The final piece of the legal puzzle fell into place. Elias hired a forensic document examiner, a specialist who frequently testified in federal cases. The expert spent 3 hours analyzing the withdrawal slips against my actual handwriting samples from old birthday cards and employment contracts. The report came back 48 hours later, conclusive evidence of forgery. The loops on the Y and the pressure points on the M matched my stepfather's handwriting style, not mine. Elias called me into his office one last time to sign the complaint. We are filing for damages. Restitution of the $85,000. Punitive damages for identity theft and legal fees, Elias said, sliding the thick document toward me. Are you ready to start the war? I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I am not starting a war, I said, signing my name, my real signature at the bottom. I am just finishing one. It took exactly 3 weeks for the hammer to drop. According to the update from Elias, the process server timed the delivery perfectly. He walked up the driveway of the Victorian mansion right in the middle of my mother's monthly charity tea, handing her the thick envelope of legal documents in front of the entire neighborhood committee. The humiliation must have been immediate and absolute because 10 minutes later, the phone lines at the Obsidian Palette lit up. I was prepping the evening specials when the hostess rushed into the kitchen, looking terrified. Mallory, there is a woman on line 1, she said, her voice shaking. She says she is your mother, and she is screaming that she is coming down here to... Well, she used words I cannot repeat. I wiped my hands on a towel, my pulse steady. I had been expecting this. Do not engage, I told her calmly. Hang up, and tell security at the front desk that Patricia Vance and Tiffany Vance are barred from the premises. If they show up, call the police immediately. I went back to slicing truffles, but the peace did not last long. An hour later, a commotion erupted in the lobby. I could hear the shrieking from the back of the kitchen. Chef Gordon looked at me and nodded. Handle it, Mallory, he said firmly. What, we are behind you. I walked out into the elegant foyer of the restaurant. It was chaos. My mother was red-faced, screaming at the terrified hostess, while Tiffany was doing what she did best. She was standing on a velvet bench, phone held high, live streaming the entire meltdown. Look at this place, Tiffany yelled at her screen, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured cheeks. My sister works in this fancy place while she tries to sue her own family. She wants to put our parents in jail. She is an ungrateful monster. Diners were standing up, looking disturbed. My mother spotted me and lunged forward, but the large security guard blocked her path. You little witch, my mother screamed, her eyes bulging. How dare you? After everything we did for you, you drop this lawsuit right now or I will... You will what I asked. My voice cutting through her noise. I did not yell. I did not cry. I just stood there, holding a folded piece of paper. Sirens wailed outside, growing louder until blue and red lights flashed against the glass doors. 2 police officers entered, looking stern. My mother immediately changed her demeanor, trying to look like the victim. Officer! Thank God, she gasped, clutching her pearls. My daughter. She is mentally unstable. We just came to check on her. I walked up to the lead officer and handed him the paper. Officer, this is a temporary restraining order granted by a judge in New York yesterday. I said clearly, these 2 individuals are named on it. By being here, at my place of employment, they are in direct violation of the 500 feet rule. The officer read the document quickly, then looked at my mother. The sympathy vanished from his face. Ma'am, you need to come with us, he said, reaching for his handcuffs. You are under arrest for violating a court order. What my mother shrieked as he spun her around. Do you know who I am? You cannot touch me. Tiffany panicked. She turned her phone toward the police, screaming, police brutality. They are hurting my mom. The second officer grabbed Tiffany's arm. Put the phone down. Miss, you are coming to obstruction and trespassing. The restaurant fell silent as my mother and sister were marched out in handcuffs. But the silence was broken by the sound of 20 other phones. The diners were filming. Tiffany's live stream had backfired spectacularly. But now, the viral moment was not her narrative. It was the image of the high society Vance women being dragged out of a restaurant like common criminals. I watched the squad car drive away. I felt a strange emptiness, but no regret. I finished my shift, keeping my head down. When I finally arrived back at my new studio apartment in Queens around midnight, the adrenaline had faded, leaving me exhausted. I walked toward my parking spot on the street. I stopped cold. My car, a modest silver sedan, was covered in wet crimson paint. It looked like a massacre under the streetlights. The windshield was smashed in. There was no note, but I knew exactly who had done this. My stepfather, Garrison, was too cowardly to confront me in public, but he was petty enough to destroy property in the dark. A month ago, I would have fallen to the sidewalk and cried. I would have been terrified that they found me. Now, I just felt disgust. I took out my phone. I did not call the police immediately. First, I took photos, detailed, high-resolution photos of the damage, the paint cans left in the gutter, and the tire tracks nearby. I emailed them directly to Elias with a subject line that read, "Evidence of harassment and vandalism." They thought this would scare me into dropping the lawsuit. They did not realize they had just handed me the final nail for their coffin. The discovery phase is where secrets go to die. My family, in their infinite arrogance and stinginess, decided not to hire a reputable defense attorney to fight the lawsuit. Instead, they walked into the high-stakes world of federal fraud litigation represented by a man named Larry. He was Garrison's old drinking buddy, a real estate lawyer who clearly had not stepped inside a courtroom in 2 decades. He wore a suit that was too large and kept wiping sweat from his forehead with a crumpled handkerchief. Elias sat opposite them, looking like a shark smelling blood in the water. The deposition began with Tiffany. She treated the sworn testimony like a reality TV confessional, rolling her eyes and sighing at every question. When Elias asked her why she felt entitled to authorize payments from a trust that did not belong to her, she scoffed. "Look, it is not like she was going to use it," Tiffany said, flipping her hair. "Mallory is, well, look at her. She is single. She's a workaholic. She does not have a boyfriend, let alone a fiancé. I needed the dress. It was a Vera Wang. Do you expect me to wear off the rack because my sister is a hoarder?" The court reporter typed silently, capturing every word of her admission. Tiffany had just confessed to the intent of theft on record. Next was my mother. Patricia sat stiffly, her face a mask of indignation. She did not deny taking the money. She simply denied that it was a crime. "I am her mother," Patricia declared, slamming her hand on the mahogany table. "I gave her life. I fed her, clothed her, and put a roof over her head for 18 years. That money is family money. I have a right to manage it however I see fit. It is compensation for raising her." Elias adjusted his glasses, his voice dangerously calm. "Mrs. Vance, are you aware that the trust terms explicitly state the funds are the sole property of the beneficiary upon their 25th birthday? Regardless of familial status, parental entitlement is not a legal defense for wire fraud." "I don't care about your technicalities," she snapped. "Perhaps you will care about this," Elias said. He placed a small digital recorder on the table. He pressed play. The room filled with the crackle of a voicemail I had saved on my old phone 3 years ago, a recording I had almost forgotten until I went through my backups. "Patty? Just sign the damn thing!" Garrison's voice rasped through the speaker. "The bank won't check the signature against the card if we do it at the ATM. Mallory's too busy chopping onions to notice. We need that cash to cover the margin call before the market opens on Monday." The silence in the room was absolute. My mother's face went pale. Garrison froze, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. That is out of context," Garrison stammered. "It sounds like conspiracy to commit bank fraud," Elias countered. The United Front crumbled instantly. Garrison turned on my mother. I told you we shouldn't have touched the principal. I told you she would find out eventually. You told me, Patricia shrieked, turning on him. You were the one crying about your investments. You said you would pay it back in a month. This is your fault. It is Tiffany's fault, Garrison yelled, pointing at my sister. If she didn't need a $40,000 venue, we could have floated the debt enough, Elias said, his voice cutting through the bickering. He opened a new file folder. Since you mentioned investments, let us discuss the reality of your finances. We pulled the public property records this morning. He slid a document across the table. Mr. Vance, you took out a second mortgage on the Victorian house 6 months ago. Elias stated flatly. You leveraged the family home to buy cryptocurrency, a portfolio that has since lost 90% of its value. You didn't steal Mallory's money just for a wedding. You stole it to pay the interest on the loans, so the bank wouldn't foreclose on your house. I sat back in my chair, stunned. The air left my lungs. All this time, I thought they were rich, selfish snobs who just wanted more. The truth was pathetic. They were broke. The luxury cars, the country club memberships, the expensive scotch. It was all a lie funded by debt and theft. They were drowning, and they had used me as a life raft without asking. I looked at them, Garrison sweating, Patricia trembling, Tiffany looking confused as the reality of her poverty set in. I felt a wave of nausea, but beneath it, a profound sense of release. I was not the black sheep of a powerful dynasty. I was the host organism for a group of parasites, and I had just cut them off. Elias gave them one final chance to end it with dignity. We sat in the conference room again, the atmosphere heavy with the scent of stale coffee and desperation. He slid a settlement agreement across the table. It was simple return the $85,000 they had stolen, plus 5% interest and legal fees, and I would drop the criminal charges. You have 48 hours, Elias said, his voice void of emotion. If you sign, we settle. If you don't, we go to trial. And with the evidence we have, the district attorney will likely seek jail time for forgery and identity theft. My mother scoffed, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. We don't have that kind of cash liquid right now, and you know it. Besides, Mallory won't let her father go to prison. She is just throwing a tantrum. She looked at me, expecting me to fold, to apologize for causing a scene. I looked back at her and saw a stranger. Proceed with the trial. Elias, I said, standing up. No mercy. The collapse happened fast after that. It turned out that Garrison had not just stopped paying the mortgage. He had stopped paying everything to desperately keep up appearances for the wedding. 2 days after the settlement meeting, a foreclosure notice was taped to the front door of the Victorian mansion. The bank was calling in the loan. Garrison had gambled that Tiffany's marriage to the wealthy Braden Caldwell would bring a financial infusion to the family, perhaps a dowry or a business merger. He had bet the house on it, literally. But the house of cards didn't just fall, it incinerated. A local reporter, hungry for a scandal involving the upper crust of Connecticut society, picked up the court filings. The headline ran on the front page of the Sunday paper, local family accused of defrauding daughter to fund lavish nuptials. Braden Caldwell saw it. His parents saw it. By noon that Sunday, the engagement was off. Braden didn't even do it in person. He sent a courier to retrieve the ring. Tiffany did not handle the rejection with grace. She cracked. Ignoring the restraining order that explicitly forbade her from mentioning me or contacting me, she went on a digital rampage. She posted dozens of status updates, tagging me, calling me a jealous spinster and a snake who destroyed true love. She posted my phone number. She urged her followers to harass me. It was the stupidest thing she could have done. Elias sent the screenshots to the judge. The judge, tired of his court orders being treated as suggestions, issued a bench warrant for contempt of court. That evening, I watched the news from my safe haven in Queens. There was footage of Tiffany being led out of the mansion in handcuffs, not for a wedding rehearsal, but for a 24-hour hold in the county jail. The princess was going to spend a night on a metal cot. It was a harsh, necessary dose of reality. 2 hours later. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my apartment's security system. Motion detected at front door. I opened the app on my phone. The black and white camera feed showed a woman standing in the hallway. It was my mother. She looked disheveled. Her hair was unkempt, and she was wearing a coat over her pajamas. She had driven 2 hours to find me. She pounded on the door. I could hear her muffled voice through the app's speaker. "Mallory, please open the door. Tiffany is in jail. You have to drop the charges. Please." I sat on my couch, sipping a cup of tea, watching the screen. I did not move toward the door. I did not press the intercom button. Then, she did something I never thought I would see. Patricia Vance, the woman who had forced me to scrub a rug on my knees in front of strangers, slowly lowered herself to the dirty hallway floor. She knelt. She clasped her hands together in a begging motion, sobbing into the camera lens. "I am begging you," she wailed. "I am your mother. Please." I watched her for a long minute. The image was grainy, but the reversal of power was crystal clear. She was finally on her knees, but unlike me, she was there because of her own crimes, not because of someone else's cruelty. I closed the app and turned off my phone. I slept soundly that night. The morning of the final hearing, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. It felt appropriate. I chose my outfit carefully. For years, I had hidden in the background in black server uniforms or stained aprons. Today, I wore a sharp, tailored white suit. I walked into the courthouse with my head high, not as a victim, but as a woman who had come to collect what was hers. Inside the courtroom, the air was cold and sterile. My family sat on the defense side. They looked haggard. Garrison wore a suit that seemed slightly too loose, perhaps a result of the stress eating away at him. My mother, Patricia, looked pale, her hands twitching nervously in her lap. Tiffany sat between them, staring at the floor, stripped of her usual arrogance. Judge Sterling, a stern man with silver hair and zero tolerance for theatrics, did not waste time. He had reviewed the mountain of evidence Elias had submitted during the discovery phase. It was a massacre of facts. The forensic report confirming the forged signatures on the trust fund withdrawals was irrefutable. The bank statements showing the money flowing directly into wedding vendors and Garrison's debts were clear. And then, there was the behavior of the defendants during the litigation, the harassment video, the violation of the restraining order, the public defamation. The judge looked over his spectacles at my family. In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case of familial financial abuse so brazen and so poorly concealed, Judge Sterling said, his voice echoing in the silent room. The evidence of fraud, conversion, and identity theft is overwhelming. He looked down at his notes and began to read the verdict. I find in favor of the plaintiff, Mallory Vance, on all counts. The judge declared, I am awarding full restitution of the stolen principal in the amount of $85,000. Furthermore, given the malicious nature of the fraud and the intentional infliction of emotional distress, I am awarding punitive damages in the amount of $50,000. The defendants are also ordered to pay the plaintiff's legal fees, totaling $43,000. I did quick math in my head. $178,000. It was a staggering sum. Garrison stood up, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Your Honor, this is preposterous. We don't have that kind of money. We are destitute. Judge Sterling did not blink. I am aware of your financial disclosures. Mr. Vance, the court has noted that your liquid assets are insufficient. However, you do possess one significant asset with equity remaining, despite the second mortgage. The judge picked up a gavel. Therefore, to satisfy this judgment, I am ordering the immediate attachment and forced sale of the property located at 12 Oakwood Drive. The proceeds will be used to pay the bank, and the remainder will satisfy the judgment owed to Ms. Vance. The silence that followed lasted only a second before it shattered. No! Garrison screamed, slamming his fist on the table. You can't take my house. I worked my whole life for that house. This is a corrupt system. next to him. My mother let out a theatrical gasp. She put her hand to her forehead and slumped sideways, sliding off her chair in a faint that was just a little too graceful to be real. Mom Tiffany shrieked, bursting into loud, ugly sobs. "Mallory, look what you did. You are killing her." "Order," the judge boomed, banging the gavel. "Bailiff, remove the defendant if he cannot control himself." Two uniformed bailiffs moved toward Garrison, forcing him back into his seat. Another checked on my mother, who miraculously fluttered her eyelids open when she realized no one was rushing to give her mouth-to-mouth. I sat perfectly still. I watched the chaos unfolding at the other table. Garrison was red-faced and panting. Tiffany was weeping into her hands. Patricia was looking around wildly, realizing her performance had failed. I waited for the rush of triumph. I waited to feel happy or vindicated. But as I looked at the people who had raised me, the people who had viewed me as nothing more than livestock to be harvested for their own comfort, I felt none of that. I just felt light. The crushing weight that had sat on my chest for 27 years was gone. "Court is adjourned," the judge said. I stood up, smoothed the front of my white jacket, and turned to Elias. "Thank you," I said softly. I walked out of the courtroom without looking back at them. The sound of Tiffany's sobbing faded behind the heavy doors, silenced by the thick wood and the absolute finality of the law. The legal gears of the state grind slowly, but when they finally catch, they crush everything in their path. The Victorian mansion on Oakwood Drive, once the impregnable fortress of the Vance family, was seized, sealed, and listed for an emergency auction within 30 days of the verdict. It was sold to a real estate developer for a fraction of its market value, but enough to satisfy the primary lien holders and the judgment against my family. On the day of the eviction, I parked my car 2 blocks away. I did not get out. I did not want them to see me, but I needed to see this. I needed to witness the physical dismantling of the lie they had lived for so long. It was a gray Tuesday morning. A moving truck sat in the driveway, but it was not a professional white glove service. It was a rental that Tiffany was struggling to load by herself. The sheriff's deputies stood by the front door, clipboards in hand, cataloging every item that left the house to ensure nothing of value was removed. I watched through my windshield as my mother, Patricia, struggled out the front door, dragging a heavy, gilded antique chair. She was shouting at one of the deputies, her face twisted in that familiar mask of entitlement. "This is a family heirloom," she screamed, her voice carrying down the quiet street. "You cannot take my furniture." The deputy, a large man who looked entirely unimpressed, stepped in front of her. He placed a hand on the chair. "Ma'am, that item is listed on the seizure inventory as part of the estate's value," he said firmly. "It stays. Put it down, or we will have a problem." My mother froze. She looked at the house, then at the chair, and finally at the officer. For the first time in her life, her rage was impotent. She let go of the chair and walked to the rental truck empty-handed, looking small and defeated. Tiffany fared no better. The golden child was currently trying to liquidate her own fantasy. I later learned that she had spent the previous week visiting every consignment shop and pawnbroker in the city. She sold her collection of designer handbags, the Birkins, the Chanels for pennies on the dollar, just to scrape together a security deposit for a rental. The saddest sight, however, was the large white garment bag she tossed into the back of the truck. The Vera Wang wedding dress, the very object that had started this war, had been rejected by the bridal resale shops because it had been altered too specifically. It was now just a pile of useless tulle and silk, a ghost of a wedding that never happened. Garrison was notably absent. The man who had lectured me on financial responsibility while stealing my inheritance had not stayed to face the music. 2 days after the verdict, when it became clear the house was gone and the creditors were circling, he packed a single suitcase and vanished in the middle of the night. Rumor had it that he owed significant amounts of money to people far less forgiving than Judge Sterling illegal bookmakers who did not use lawsuits to collect debts. He left his wife and stepdaughter to clean up the wreckage he had helped create, with no income, no husband, and no home. My mother and Tiffany had no choice but to descend into the reality they had always mocked. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a dilapidated complex on the industrial edge of the city. It was a place where the walls were paper thin, the heating was inconsistent, and sirens were the nightly lullaby. I heard from Aunt Karen that they had been forced to take jobs. My mother was working the front desk at a budget motel, checking in guests at all hours of the night. Tiffany, with no college degree and no work experience other than being an influencer, had taken a job at a fast food chain. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. The girl who had laughed at me for smelling like kitchen grease was now coming home every night smelling of fryer oil and minimum wage. A week after the house closed, my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. Deposit received wire transfer, county clerk's office. I opened the app. The number was there in black and white. $178,000. It was the surplus from the house sale after the bank had taken their share. Every penny of my grandmother's legacy, plus the damages, plus the legal fees, had been returned to me. I stared at the screen for a long time. It was just a number, but it represented freedom. It was the final severance of the cord. The empire of lies had crumbled, and from its dust, I was the only one who had walked away whole. 6 months have passed since the gavel fell in that cold courtroom, and my life has transformed into something unrecognizable. I was standing in a kitchen, but this time, it was not a dark, oppressive room in a Victorian mansion where I was treated like a servant. This was a gleaming, sun-drenched commercial space with stainless steel counters and top-of-the-line ovens. The sign on the glass front door read, Phoenix Catering in elegant gold script. I had used the settlement money to build this, rising from the ashes of my previous life, just like the mythical bird. I was in the middle of finalizing a menu for a charity gala when my laptop pinged with a notification. It was an email. The sender name made me pause for a fleeting second. Patricia Vance. I opened it. The message was short and riddled with spelling errors, a stark contrast to the polished, haughty tone she used to command. She wrote that the winter was coming early this year, that the heating bill at their apartment was overdue, and that Tiffany had the flu. She ended the email with a plea that would have once brought me to my knees with guilt. Please, Mallory. Family helps family. Just $500. We are freezing. I sat there, staring at the screen. I waited for the anger to rise. I waited for the sorrow or the obligation. But there was nothing. No rapid heartbeat. No sweaty palms. I felt as indifferent as I would reading a spam advertisement for car insurance. They were freezing because of choices they had made, choices that involved stealing my future to fund a party. I moved my cursor to the trash icon. I clicked delete. Then, I went a step further. I went into my settings and blocked the email address permanently. It was not an act of malice, it was an act of hygiene. I was cleaning up the last speck of dust from a messy room. The front door chimed, interrupting my thoughts. Aunt Karen walked in, beaming, holding a bottle of expensive champagne. She slammed a magazine down on the counter. "Have you seen it yet?" she asked, her voice bubbling with excitement. I looked down. It was the local business monthly. On the cover was a photo of me, wearing my chef's coat, looking confident and strong. The headline read, "Rising from the Flames, Mallory Vance named Promising Young Entrepreneur of the Year." "We are popping this right now," Karen declared, reaching for 2 flutes. As the cork popped and the golden liquid fizzed into the glasses, a memory flashed in my mind. I saw myself exactly 6 months ago, on my knees on a Persian rug, scrubbing red wine while my sister filmed me and my mother laughed. I looked at that memory, acknowledged it, and then let it dissolve. That girl on the floor was gone. The woman standing here was a business owner, a homeowner, and financially independent. I took a sip of the champagne, then reached into my desk drawer. I pulled out my checkbook. "What are you doing?" Karen asked. "I am making a down payment on my soul," I said with a smile. "I wrote a check for $10,000. The payee line read, "The Connecticut Coalition Against Economic Abuse." It was an organization that helped women who had been trapped financially by controlling partners or family members. I could not change my past, but I could use the money my grandmother left me to ensure other women could buy their freedom, just like I did. At the end of the day, I turned off the lights of the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerators was a comforting sound. I locked the front door and stepped out into the crisp spring evening. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and rain. I walked to my car, a reliable, brand new SUV that I had bought with my own earnings, not the settlement money. As I drove home to my own condo, a place where no one could enter without my permission, I realized something profound. For months, I thought I wanted them to suffer. I thought I wanted them to feel the pain they caused me. But as I drove with the windows down, listening to my favorite music, I realized that their suffering was irrelevant to me. The best revenge was not making them destitute. They did that to themselves. The best revenge was living a life so full, so vibrant, and so successful that they became nothing more than a footnote in my biography. They were stuck in the cold, dwelling on the past. I was driving into the sun. I parked my car and looked up at the stars. I finally understood the truth about fairy tales. Cinderella did not need a prince to save her. She just needed a ruthless lawyer and the courage to walk out the door. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please leave a comment down below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Mallory's journey. If you enjoyed the story of justice and reclaiming one's life, please subscribe to the channel Mirror Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people who might need a little inspiration to stand up for themselves. See you in the next story,